What if I told you there's a moment in an INFJ's life that's kind of like when Neo finally sees the Matrix code? You know that scene where everything clicks, where the confusion lifts, and suddenly he's not just dodging bullets anymore. He's bending reality itself? Yeah, that's what happens when an INFJ masters their intuition. Except instead of stopping bullets, they're stopping themselves from making terrible decisions, toxic relationships, and soul-crushing life paths before they even start. Here's the wild part. Most INFJs walk around for years feeling like they're broken. They get these strange gut feelings about people. They dream things that later happen. They walk into rooms and just know something's off, even though everyone else seems fine. And society? Society tells them they're being paranoid, overly sensitive, or just plain weird. So they learn to ignore it. They learn to doubt that inner voice. They learn to fit in, but then something shifts. Maybe it's after one too many times of ignoring their gut and regretting it. Maybe it's after someone betrays them in exactly the way their intuition warned them about months earlier. Or maybe they just get tired of pretending to be someone they're not. Whatever the trigger, they finally decide to stop running from their intuition and start running with it instead. And that's when everything changes. I'm talking about changes so profound that the INFJ barely recognizes their own life 6 months later. Changes that make other people ask, "What happened to you? You're different." Changes that feel like finally coming home to yourself after years of being lost. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 6 surprising truths about this transformation that nobody really talks about. Not the surface level, trust your gut, advice you see everywhere. I'm talking about the real, raw, sometimes uncomfortable truths about what actually happens when an INFJ stops fighting their nature and starts embodying it fully. So if you're an INFJ who's tired of feeling like an alien in human skin, or if you love an INFJ and you're trying to understand why they seem to operate on a completely different frequency than everyone else, you're in the right place. Because what you're about to discover might just explain everything you've been wondering about. Let's dive in. Truth number 1. Their intuition isn't magic. It's pattern recognition on steroids. Let's start by clearing up a common misconception. People often think that INFJ intuition is some kind of mystical superpower, like they're reading minds or seeing the future. But here's the real deal. It's actually something much more grounded in how their brain works. INFJs have what psychologists call extrovert intuition as a secondary function, combined with their dominant function of introverted feeling. What this means in plain English is that their brain is constantly running in the background, picking up on patterns that other people completely miss. They're like human pattern recognition machines, except they're doing it with social cues, emotional signals, and behavioral details that most of us don't even register. Think about it this way. You might walk into a room and see a friend sitting on the couch. An INFJ walks into that same room and immediately notices that your friend's shoulders are slightly tense. Their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. They're sitting at an angle that suggests they might want to leave the conversation, and their voice has a slightly higher pitch than usual. They're collecting all these tiny data points, many of them below conscious awareness, and their brain is processing them at lightning speed to create an overall picture of what's really going on emotionally. When an INFJ masters this skill, they stop doubting these patterns. They learn to trust what they're sensing because they've spent years, usually without realizing it, building an accurate internal database of human behavior. They start saying things like, "I just knew," and they're usually right because they're not actually guessing. They're drawing conclusions from evidence their conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. This is where everything starts to change. Instead of questioning themselves constantly, wondering if they're being too sensitive or reading too much into things, they begin to own their observations. They stop apologizing for noticing things. And that confidence? That's magnetic. People sense it, and suddenly, others start trusting the INFJ's read on situations more than they trust their own first impressions. Truth number 2. They develop an almost supernatural ability to predict human behavior. Here's where things get really interesting. Once an INFJ stops second-guessing their intuitive insights and actually acts on them, they start noticing something wild. They can predict what people are going to do, say, and feel with stunning accuracy. Now, this isn't because they're fortune tellers or have a crystal ball hidden somewhere. It's because they've spent so much time observing human nature, their own and everyone else's, that they understand the patterns of human behavior at a level most people never reach. They see the connections between a person's values, their fears, their past experiences, and the choices they're likely to make in the future. When an INFJ masters their intuition, they become genuinely skilled at anticipating how situations will unfold. A friend mentions they're thinking about quitting their job, and the INFJ immediately understands a real issue beneath the surface. Maybe it's not actually the job itself, but a feeling of not being valued. They can predict that if someone doesn't address this feeling, they'll just bring the same problem to their next job. This kind of insight saves people so much time and heartache. The really powerful part? Once the INFJ masters this ability, they stop being vague about their insights. Instead of dropping mysterious hints or waiting for people to figure things out on their own, they learn how to communicate what they're seeing in a way that actually helps people. They realize their job isn't to be cryptic, it's to be helpful. This transforms their relationships completely. People start coming to them for advice not because they're magical, but because they're accurate. They help others see patterns in their own lives that they couldn't see themselves. They predict obstacles before they happen and help people navigate around them. They anticipate what will bring someone joy or fulfillment, and they gently nudge people in those directions. Truth number 3. They finally understand that their sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's their superpower. For a lot of INFJs, especially when they're younger, their intuitive sensitivity feels like a curse. They feel things so deeply. They pick up on other people's emotions like emotional sponges. They notice every subtle shift in tone, every micro expression of discomfort, every sign that someone isn't being authentic. And honestly, it exhausts them. Many young INFJs spend years trying to suppress or downplay this sensitivity. They think something's wrong with them for being so affected by other people's moods. They feel guilty for being drained after social interactions. They wonder why they can't just chill out and not care so much about everyone's feelings. But here's the truth that changes everything. When an INFJ finally masters their intuition, they realize this sensitivity isn't a flaw at all. It's the source of their greatest gifts. Their ability to feel deeply and notice subtly is exactly what allows them to connect with people on a profound level. It's what makes them incredible therapists, counselors, mentors, and friends. It's what allows them to create art, music, and writing that touches people's souls. The shift happens when they stop trying to change this aspect of themselves and instead learn to manage it. They develop strategies to protect their energy while still honoring their sensitivity. They learn that they can be deeply affected by others' emotions without taking on those emotions as their own. They understand that feeling things intensely is a feature, not a bug. Once this mental shift happens, INFJs report feeling so much more at peace. They stop apologizing for who they are. They start seeking out situations and relationships that honor their sensitivity rather than dismissing it. They surround themselves with people who appreciate their depth rather than finding it exhausting. And suddenly, their entire life feels more aligned with who they actually are. Truth number 4. They become extraordinary at helping others find their purpose. One of the most profound changes that happens when an INFJ masters their intuition is that they become almost unnaturally skilled at helping other people find their purpose and direction in life. Think about what INFJs are naturally good at. They see people's potential before others do. They notice people's gifts and talents, sometimes before the person themselves realizes they have them. They understand what drives people at a core level, what values matter most, what kind of life would feel meaningful to them, what work would make them feel alive. When an INFJ is young or hasn't yet mastered their intuition, they often keep these observations to themselves. They might think, who am I to tell someone what they should do? Or they might share their insights, but do it in such a hesitant way that people don't really take them seriously. But when an INFJ masters their intuition, something shifts. They become confident in their ability to see what others are missing about themselves and the world around them. They learn how to articulate these insights in a way that's actually helpful rather than overwhelming. They understand how to guide someone toward their purpose without pushing them off a cliff. This is when INFJs often find their true calling. Many of them gravitate toward work that involves helping others. Coaching, counseling, teaching, mentoring, or creative work that touches people's hearts. Not because they're supposed to, but because they finally realize that this is where their intuition is most powerful and most needed. The ripple effect is incredible. An INFJ who's mastered their intuition and is using it to help others find their purpose literally changes lives. Think about it. They help one person find their calling, and that person goes on to change the lives of 10 more people. Then each of those people influences others. The impact compounds exponentially. Truth number 5. They stop absorbing everyone else's problems and learn healthy boundaries. Here's a hard truth that a lot of INFJs have to learn. Before they master their intuition, they often use it to absorb and carry other people's emotional weight. Because they can sense what's bothering someone so clearly, they often feel responsible for fixing it. They take on other people's problems like they're their own, and they end up exhausted, overwhelmed, and resentful. But when an INFJ truly masters their intuition, one of the biggest shifts is learning to use it for good without letting it drain them. They learn that they can see someone's pain without making it their mission to fix it. They can understand someone's struggle without shouldering the burden themselves. This is where healthy boundaries come in. A truly intuitive INFJ realizes that their job isn't to solve everyone's problems or carry everyone's emotional baggage. Their job is to be a compassionate, supportive presence while honoring their own need for peace and energy conservation. This change is revolutionary. Suddenly, INFJs have more energy. They're less resentful in their relationships because they're not silently carrying resentment about all the emotional weight they've been holding. They can show up for people from a place of abundance rather than depletion. They're better at helping others because they're not running on empty. And here's something really beautiful. When INFJs set healthy boundaries like this, the people around them actually respect them more. People realize they can't take advantage of the INFJ's compassion. They start valuing the INFJ's time and energy more highly. And paradoxically, relationships become deeper and more meaningful because they're based on genuine care rather than codependency. Truth number 6. They become catalysts for transformation in their communities. The final truth about what happens when an INFJ masters their intuition is perhaps the most beautiful and profound. They become genuine catalysts for transformation in their families, friend groups, and communities. Because INFJs can sense what's happening beneath the surface of situations, they often see where changes need to happen before anyone else does. They notice that a community is stuck in old patterns that no longer serve anyone. They recognize when relationships have become toxic or when someone is in a situation that's slowly destroying them. They sense where growth is possible and where transformation is needed. When an INFJ hasn't yet mastered their intuition, they might sit with these observations and do nothing. They might think it's not their place to speak up. They might doubt themselves so much that they talk themselves out of sharing what they're seeing. But when an INFJ truly masters their intuition, they learn to trust what they're seeing enough to voice it. And because they've also learned to communicate their insights in ways that actually land with people, their observations have weight. People listen. People think about what they're saying. And often, real change starts to happen. INFJs who've mastered their intuition often find themselves becoming the person others turn to when things need to change. They become healers within their families, mediators in conflicts, visionaries in their workplaces, or creative forces in their communities. They help people see possibilities they couldn't see before. They guide people toward versions of themselves and their communities that are healthier, more authentic, and more aligned with what's actually important. The really remarkable thing is that this happens not through force or manipulation, but through genuine insight and compassionate guidance. People follow an INFJ's lead not because they're being pushed, but because they trust that the INFJ is seeing something true and important. How the transformation actually happens. The real-world journey. Understanding these 6 truths is one thing. But you might be wondering, how does an INFJ actually get from where they are now to truly mastering their intuition? What does that journey actually look like? The process usually starts with a breaking point. For many INFJs, there's a moment where they realize that constantly doubting themselves, second-guessing their perceptions, and trying to suppress who they are just isn't working anymore. They're too tired. They're too confused. They can't keep living this way. From there, the journey usually involves several key steps. First, there's usually a period of learning about their personality type and understanding how their mind actually works. When an INFJ learns about MBTI or other personality frameworks, things often start clicking into place. Suddenly, they realize that they're not broken or overly sensitive. They're just wired differently, and there's actually a large community of people who are wired similarly. Next comes the difficult work of learning to trust themselves. This is where many INFJs struggle because it requires them to start acting on their intuitive insights, even when they can't fully explain or justify them. It requires having confidence in their gut feeling when logic alone doesn't support their conclusion. It requires being willing to be wrong sometimes and learning from those experiences. Somewhere in this process, INFJs usually also have to do some serious work around boundaries and self-care. They have to learn how to protect their energy without isolating themselves. They have to figure out what kinds of relationships and environments allow them to thrive rather than just survive. And then, usually gradually, confidence starts building. The INFJ starts noticing that their intuitive read on situations is usually accurate. They start noticing that when they trust their gut, things work out better. They start seeing evidence that they're actually really good at understanding people and situations. This evidence builds on itself, and before long, they're not questioning themselves nearly as much. The ripple effects. How mastered intuition changes everything. When an INFJ reaches this point, when they've truly mastered their intuition, the changes aren't just personal. Yes, they feel better about themselves. Yes, they have more peace and confidence. But the real magic is in the ripple effects. Their relationships change. They're more authentic because they're not trying to hide who they are. They're more present because they're not constantly running background calculations about what people really mean or feel. They're better at communicating because they can express their insights clearly. Their work life changes. They either find their way to work that genuinely matters to them, or they find new meaning in their existing work because they're approaching it differently. Either way, they're usually more engaged and more satisfied because they're doing work that aligns with their values and uses their natural gifts. Their families change. Family members often notice that the INFJ is different in a way that's hard to put into words but feels genuinely good. The INFJ is less resentful, more present, and more able to show up for people without losing themselves in the process. Their communities change, whether it's their friend group, their church, their workplace, or their neighborhood. The ripple effects of an INFJ who's mastered their intuition are real and tangible. They become the person others go to with real problems. They become the person who suggests the conversation that needs to happen. They become the person who notices when someone's hurting and reaches out. And all of these small actions add up to create communities that are more connected, more authentic, and more compassionate. Overcoming the obstacles. What gets in the way? Of course, the journey to mastering intuition isn't always smooth for INFJs. There are several common obstacles that tend to get in the way. One major obstacle is perfectionism. Many INFJs hold themselves to impossibly high standards and believe that if they can't perfectly understand or help a situation, they shouldn't try at all. Learning to accept that they don't have to be perfect, that good is often enough, is crucial. Another big obstacle is fear of conflict or confrontation. INFJs often avoid speaking up about what they're sensing because they're worried about hurting someone's feelings or causing conflict. Learning that sometimes necessary conversations require short-term discomfort for long-term healing is a game changer. Many INFJs also struggle with imposter syndrome. They might master their intuition, but still feel like they don't really deserve to be confident or take up space with their insights. Overcoming this requires learning to separate their self-worth from external validation and learning to trust their own evaluation of their abilities. There's also the obstacle of burnout. Many INFJs don't master their intuition because they're already too exhausted by the time they might try. They're running on empty before they ever get the chance to build genuine confidence. For these INFJs, the first step is often about rest and recovery, not pushing harder. Living in alignment. What a mastered INFJ life looks like. So what does life actually look like when an INFJ has finally mastered their intuition? What does their day-to-day existence feel like? It's marked by a quality of presence and clarity that wasn't there before. An INFJ who's mastered their intuition moves through the world with a kind of quiet confidence. They're not arrogant or pushy about what they know. They don't need everyone to agree with them or validate their perceptions. They simply know what they know, and they act accordingly. Their relationships are deeper and more authentic. They're not performing or trying to be what they think other people want them to be. They're real, and that realness invites realness from others. People feel genuinely seen by them, and in return, they see the INFJ genuinely too. Their creative expression often flourishes. Many INFJs who've mastered their intuition find that their writing, art, music, or other forms of expression become much richer and more meaningful. They have permission to express the depth of what they're perceiving, and it comes through in their work. Their decision-making becomes more confident and usually more effective. They're not paralyzing themselves with indecision. They can weigh options and make choices more quickly because they trust what they're sensing about what the right path is. Perhaps most importantly, they feel at peace. Not that life becomes easy or problem-free. INFJ life is never problem-free because they're too attuned to problems that need addressing. But there's a fundamental peace that comes from finally accepting themselves and learning to operate from their genuine strengths rather than constantly fighting against their nature. Conclusion: your intuition is waiting. If you're an INFJ reading this, here's what I want you to know. That incredible gift of intuition that you've been doubting, second-guessing, and sometimes wishing you didn't have, it's not a flaw. It's not too much. It's not something you need to apologize for or suppress. It's the source of your greatest gifts. It's what allows you to see what others miss, to help people in ways few others can, and to contribute something genuinely valuable to the world. All you have to do is learn to trust it. And if you're not an INFJ but you know one, I hope you understand now why they seem to know things without being told, why they notice what others miss, and why they're so invested in people and their well-being. They're not being dramatic or overly sensitive. They're actually perceiving things with remarkable accuracy. You could probably benefit from trusting their insights more than you have been. The world needs INFJs who've mastered their intuition. We need people who can see beneath the surface. We need people who care enough to notice when something's wrong and brave enough to speak up about it. We need people who can guide others toward their potential and help communities move toward health. So if you're on this journey, keep going. It's worth it. And when you finally reach that place where you trust yourself, where you own your gifts, and where you use your intuition to genuinely help and uplift others, everything really does change. And you'll wonder why it took you so long to get there, even though you'll understand completely. Because INFJs are tender-hearted, thoughtful people, and it takes courage to stop diminishing yourself and start shining. Your intuition has been trying to guide you all along. It's time to listen.